Happy Women's History Month, everyone. I'm Chloe, and welcome back to Science Reads, where every month I discuss a science book and we talk about the science behind it. So this month felt a little obvious. It's one I have tried to read a few different times here. So we're talking about Invisible Women. It's Data Bias in a World Designed by Men by Pérez. Okay, I have a lot of feelings about this book. Good ones on the outset, but okay, we're gonna have to figure out. There's a lot of topics I want to discuss because I like the premise of the book, but I think it's fallen short in a few different regards, and that's what we're gonna cover in our episode today. So, I have tried reading this book 3 separate times. I started first halfway through grad school and I had to put it down. Then I tried the audiobook more recently, and it got me so frustrated and angry, just all the stats you hear. I couldn't keep listening to it. So then I picked the physical book from the library, and that was how I managed to get through it all, because I could literally set down the book when I started getting too heated. My rating, just to be frank, transparent, is only 2 out of 5. And it's not because I don't find the book important, but it's because important and effective communication are 2 very different things, and I think the book confuses them. So we're going to talk about what the book did brilliantly, what the science actually says, so go into some of the stats that they provide, but then also what I think the book's missing and why I kept rage quitting it. Alright, let's dive in.
Chloe, the scientist.
Science is for everyone.
Now, the central alignment is built around what the author calls the gender data gap, right? The idea is that across virtually every major system in modern society, medicine, urban planning, technology, economics, the workplace, data historically has been collected by and about men. Men are treated as the default human, and women are either an afterthought or simply absent from a lot of the data. One thing to know going into this is the book covers a lot of topics I just mentioned, but it's not very deep. It's intentionally written as long-form journalism, right, rather than academic theory. And it's because the author wants to cover as much ground as possible, and I get it. But if you're picking this up expecting a deep dive into one area, you're going to feel a little let down. But if you want a panoramic map of all of what we know about the science and the problem, that's what this book is. My gripe with the book is really emphasized the most, even in the first chapter or two, when the author acknowledges that men are less likely, she gives some stats essentially, that men are less likely to read books about women. And this book, of course, is a book about women. And then she cites, other stats, essentially saying that men aren't going to read as much a book about women, and even more so if they know that it's talking about gender bias. And to me, that kind of points out the whole reason I feel defeated a little by this book, because I think she has some awesome points and stats. But if even I, as a woman, I think of myself as a feminist, I have a hard time reading this book. I can't imagine, you're speaking to the echo chamber, right? The people who already believe what you're talking about. And anyone you're trying to reach, men or just, people who don't believe in the gender bias, they're not going to pick this up, let alone if they do pick it up, they're only get past the first page or two. And the fact that she points this out right in the beginning, I think, should have had a bit of self-reflection. But maybe that wasn't her goal. Maybe her goal was just to have everything on the piece of paper. I don't know. Let's dive into the actual science, though, and give some fun stats, or fun, important statistics. And this is, I think, the part where this book does a brilliant job, and I think it's really important that people read because of this. I just think, overall, the story arc could have been done better. So women are 50% more likely to be misdiagnosed after a heart attack than men. Why? Well, because what we call the classic heart attack, the chest pain, the left arm pain, is actually the male presentation of a heart attack. Women often present with nausea, jaw pain, fatigue, and back pain. So these have historically been labelled as atypical, which is a remarkable term to use for symptoms that affect half the population. Here's a stat that I really can't stop thinking about, I've got written right here, is that when a woman is in a car crash, she's 47% more likely to be more seriously injured than a man, and 17% more likely to die. Do you know why this is? This is because crash test dummies have historically been modelled on the 50th percentile of the male body, roughly 5'9" and 170 pounds. Women, on average, are shorter, with less muscle mass in their necks and upper torso. It sits differently, so they take force differently and are more vulnerable to whiplash. The seatbelts, headrests, airbags are optimised for a body that isn't yours if you're a woman. And these are just a few examples. The book is full of examples like this, like smartphones designed for the average male hand size that feels slightly too big for the one-hand use for most women. Voice recognition software trained predominantly on male voices, so it can literally understand women less accurately. Alright, the final section of the book looks at what happens to women when the systems fail entirely. Floods, war, refugee crises, displacement. And it's devastating from the other chapters because the stakes are really large-scale life or death. A 2016 study cited in this book found that women in India who use open fields to relieve themselves because they lack access to household toilets are twice as likely to experience non-partner sexual violence as women with a toilet at home. That's an infrastructure and sanitation data gap with direct violence consequences. Refugee camp design doesn't often account for women's specific safety needs, communal washing facilities that aren't safe to use at night, latrines positioned in a way that create vulnerability, aid distributions that assume a male head of household will collect and distribute supplies, even in situations where women are the ones doing the caregiving. So, when disasters hit, the book argues, the data failures that were inconvenient in normal life then become fatal. The people collecting relief data, designing emergency infrastructure, allocating aid, they have the same blind spots as the people who designed your car's airbags. And in crisis, those blind spots kill people. So another section I wanted to flag for anyone watching this in 2026, because of what Pérez wrote in 2019 has only become more relevant over time. And spoiler, it has to do with AI. So the tech chapter covers the male bias baked into voice recognition, smartphone design, and early health apps. But the deeper point is about algorithms and AI. If AI systems are trained on historical data, and that historical data has a gender gap built into it, then the AI doesn't just inherit the bias, it amplifies it and then presents it back as objective truth. Think about hiring algorithms trained on decades of male-dominated hiring decisions, or medical diagnostic tools trained on datasets where women were underrepresented, or navigation apps that can tell you the fastest route but not the safest, which, as the book points out, is a different concern depending on your gender. Now, the author warned in 2019 that AI would make this problem worse if we didn't fix the underlying data. And here we are. The World Economic Forum's 2023 Gender Gap Report estimated that at the current pace, workplace gender parity is still 131 years away, in part because the systems making those decisions are built on biased foundations. Now, the book didn't fully develop this thread because it's back in 2019, and the AI landscape have shaped significantly since then. But the core diagnosis was right, and it does make this chapter feel kind of prophetic now, and I think is one of the really big takeaways from this book. Alright, and now into the reading experience itself. Like I said, I have tried to read this book a few other times, and the first time I actually had to stop reading is, I think it was just hitting close to home too much when I was in grad school, dealing with gender biases and sexism in my PhD. And when you're a woman in a scientific, academic environment, you don't need a book to tell you that the contributions that you're doing versus your male counterparts are systematically undervalued. You're going to face longer wait times, more skepticism. Simply put, the systems around you in academia were not built with women in mind. Think about marriage, the different expectations in a man versus woman in a traditional marriage. Think about child rearing or, God forbid, pregnancy. A lot of these problems you probably have experienced in some way, shape, or form. And that kind of goes into my critique of the book, is the most people who need to read it are probably the least equipped and least likely to actually read this book. The women who live this stuff find it exhausting, like myself. And the men who are skeptical about it will find it very preachy. And the people somewhere in the middle, curious, not quite convinced, aren't going to get enough oxygen between each of these data points to actually breathe and process through all the information. Now, I also want to highlight some gaps in the book, because I've been having some DM exchanges with some people who've also read the book, had similar thoughts, and then brought other ones to my attention. So, the big one is, the book doesn't include trans women at all. The words transgender, non-binary, cisgender don't appear in the book. And in a book specifically about a failure to collect data that renders people invisible, It's kind of a painful irony. Trans women who face some of the most acute safety and healthcare gaps of anyone are simply not accounted for. You also got black women, disabled women, and women in the global south are significantly underrepresented. And the author does acknowledge this herself. She said she tried to find different data sets, but she couldn't always locate it. And I understand that is a real research challenge, right? But what other people have pointed out to me is that the data actually does exist. There's scholars like Dorothy Roberts who've been writing about medical racism and black women's healthcare for decades. So the data, at least for black women in medicine, are not undocumented. Just the author didn't use them in her primary sources. And I'm trying not to say, obviously, you can't cover everything in a book. But when your book is literally about who gets left out of the data, you do have a heightened responsibility, I think, to not replicate that exclusion in your own research. And the fact that she acknowledges that gap but doesn't bridge it doesn't fully absolve it in my mind. Now, reining it back in, because I understand I was just pretty critical about the book. It gives the problem a name, that gender data gap, and it is a precise policy-usable phrase. It converts a diffuse, often dismissed feeling that something's unfair into a legible, documented phenomenon. And that does matter enormously for researchers, policymakers, and anyone trying to make an argument in a meeting. I would kind of almost recommend you read this book as like a reference tool rather than thinking to sit down and read it once from end to end. And I also think that disaster section at the end is underrated and deserves more attention in the reviews that I've seen about this book. And the book does have hope in it. Again, I know I've been all a lot of doom and gloom. And it is kind of easy to miss sometimes the positives under the volumes of problems that they're giving us in the book. But one example is Iceland's women went on a general strike in 1975. Not from paid jobs, but from all unpaid work, period. Men called it the longest day. Society nearly ground to a halt, and within a year, Iceland passed a comprehensive gender equality law. It now has one of the smallest gender pay gaps in the world. Another example, blind auditions for orchestras dramatically increased the number of women that were hired. Vienna redesigned its city infrastructure around women's actual movement patterns and reduced injury rates. And the author's conclusion is essentially the data gap closes when women are in rooms where decisions are made. More women in leadership, in research design, in policy. That's the mechanism. It's not a quick fix, but it can happen. Alright, so now summing it all up, should you read this book? If you're new to these topics and really passionate or interested about it, yes, I would start by cherry picking the topics you're using. So maybe start with the medicine chapter, design chapter, maybe that natural disasters chapter. But if you're already deep in this space, it's going to validate what you know, but it'll probably also exhaust you, and I don't think you'll get that much more information from it, to be frank. The tone is going to assume immediately that you're already on board. So if you're skeptical of this premise, honestly, I probably wouldn't bother reading the book. And if you hand this book to a man in your life thinking you're going to change his mindset on things, I mean, I hope it does, but I just wouldn't get your hopes up. I guess speaking as someone who, I don't say I'm new to this topic, I do know a bit about it, but I wouldn't call myself an expert by any means, so maybe that openly curious about this topic. I struggled reading this book. And I think if you're not at least that openly curious stage, you're just not going to get through it. So yeah, 2 out of 5. I do think it's an important book. I wouldn't write it off completely, just cherry pick when you're reading it. And that's Science Reads for March, for Women's History Month. Let me know if you read this book, what your thoughts on it, if you made it all the way through, or also rage quit. Thank you for everyone who reached out to me as I was reading this. It was really fun to engage with you guys. And next month for April, we are going to be reading, I'm actually really excited for this, on pause, I think I have it, yes. I am challenging myself to actually read this book. I've had this on my shelf for years, it has been recommended by so many people, and I love this author, Walter Isaacson. So, yeah, I'm going to really try to read it this month. It's big, and you can see it's like 500 pages. But I've heard really good things about it. I mean, he is an interesting character. And this counts as science reads, in my opinion, because tech, science, it's all related to each other, and he was a genius. For everything else you want to talk about, incredible what he was able to build. So, this is April Science Read. Pick up your copy so you can read along with me. Or, if you just want to hear my thoughts, tune in at the end of the month, and I'll have another video like this. Alright, bye!